A black-haired young man was panting, rushing through the hallways of a building, finally reaching the top of the stairs. Everything that had just happened left him stunned, unable to believe that he was now in the world of the game that he had been so passionate about as a player. Staring at his reflection in the window frame, he wondered if he should try to get a cheat skill to become a fearsome player. He was still confused about why he had appeared in this body. But where did it all begin? It was a normal day at work, with his computer screen still showing the wallpaper of his favorite game. His gaze drifted over to the clock on the wall, his body suddenly tensing up as he waited for the hour hand to reach a certain time. At exactly 5:30, he shot up from his chair, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and said, "Keep up the good work," to his colleagues, a familiar phrase for when he left the office. The door made a click as it closed. While the others were still hard at work, they seemed annoyed by this guy's attitude, always rushing home right on time, probably just to play some video game. They were surprised to see him in such a hurry, all for a game they considered unimportant. He arrived at his apartment, which was filled with posters and a shelf displaying character figurines. Quickly grabbing his VR headset, he realized he'd gotten home faster than usual. It was only a 10-minute walk from his workplace, all just to be in time to play Dungeon Explorer Chronicle, also known as Dunex. As he put on the headset, he felt the familiar sensation of transitioning into the game world. Dunex's stunning graphics and action sequences had made it the dominant game in the VR MMO genre. There was a time when the game went unnoticed, but its quality and content gradually turned Dunex into a name every gamer knew. As the black-haired young man entered the game, he noticed a monster was behind him, a reminder that he had left in a hurry earlier, leaving things unfinished in an unfamiliar place. The golem lunged, ready to attack, but this guy was no ordinary player. After grinding the game for a while, he had learned how to survive. He suddenly realized it was time for a break and got up to get a drink. The game update was scheduled for 6 p.m., and thankfully, his work had ended an hour early. This was one of the reasons he chose to work at this place. He couldn't miss this opportunity, especially since he was chosen to be a tester for the upcoming large-scale update. Testers would receive a reward if they performed exceptionally well, and just thinking about it made him excited. When he arrived at the event area, the other testers were already there, chatting and making friends. The atmosphere made him feel out of place and a little anxious. But that's okay, he told himself, because he wasn't just an ordinary player. At least that's what he thought. At exactly 6 o'clock, a rumbling sound echoed. He turned around, his eyes wide with astonishment, when he saw something colossal covering the entire area. After the event, he woke up. With an indescribable expression, went about his daily work, tapping on his keyboard, while his colleagues looked at him with curiosity, wondering what had happened to him. He still went home on time, and his desk was still cluttered with memorabilia. But now he was no longer in such a rush, nor did he have that same look of desperation as before. As he left the office to head home, he thought about the past few weeks. All in all, that event was one of the most grueling challenges he had ever faced. A colossal dragon suddenly appeared, taking out 10% of the players right from the start, with random laser beams as it rose to its feet. Its thick hide was nearly immune to damage. Only after sacrificing half of the participants did they finally manage to defeat the dragon. But that was just the beginning, as the entire area suddenly began to collapse, forcing everyone to find a way to escape the death game against a time limit. Deadly traps and powerful monsters ready to annihilate anyone, continuously testing the players. Even so, our protagonist wasn't the weakest of the bunch. He could still cut through some of the monsters before more appeared. In this challenge, the only thing anyone could rely on was their own luck. But this entire event, no one but him could have cleared it. At that thought, the black-haired young man leaped for joy in the middle of the street on his way home. He got home and took a shower, and had a quick meal before immediately logging into the game, eager to check out the update he had just received via email. But when he opened it, he was intimidated by the sheer wall of text in the message. It was a user agreement. stating that he would be transported when the game began. This left him baffled, but he just assumed it was some kind of joke from the admins and decided not to think too much about it. When he reached character selection, the system asked if he wanted to customize his character or let the game do it automatically. Figuring that customization would take too long, he opted for the automatic setting and was instantly taken to an area where he found himself sitting in an auditorium, surrounded by a familiar man and many equally familiar students. In this setting, he realized he was in the opening scene of Dunex. He kept listening to the speech, bewildered by what was going on, as everything looked incredibly real. There was no way computer graphics could achieve this level of realism. Trying to remain calm, he collected his thoughts, knowing this wasn't like any normal game, since he couldn't even feel the VR goggles on his head. If this wasn't a dream, then it seemed he had actually been pulled into the game. There were two possibilities. Either his consciousness had been transferred into ore, or his entire body had been transformed into this new one. However, he wouldn't be able to confirm that until he logged out, which could only be done after moving to the classroom. Our protagonist started to wonder if he really wanted to go back. When my class was ordered to go outside, I realized I was in Class E, the lowest ranked of the 5 classes. But even so, Class E was still better than being oppressed by people from the upper classes. The question of returning came up again, but his heart was filled with desires. The desire to become strong in this world. The desire to meet his favorite character and the heroines he admired. He believed he was in a favorable situation and wanted to enjoy this world to the fullest. He was confused, finding himself out of breath after just a few steps. When I saw my reflection in the window pane, he slammed his hand against it in disbelief when he realized. This body is that of Narumi Sota, the character who constantly harassed one of the heroines, Hayase Kaoru, and repeatedly confronted the protagonist, which led to him being defeated and expelled. His nickname was Butao, which means pig. Butao was an annoying guy, a worthless low-tier character who was no match for the protagonist. Unlike with others, Kaoru treated everyone kindly except for Butao, and what made it worse was that he had been harassing her even before the entrance ceremony. Because of that, Kaoru must have hated Butao, which made his situation complicated, both physically and mentally. He realized that choosing the auto-select option might have been a huge mistake. Kaoru is about to become the center of the protagonist's group, and he didn't want to do anything too conspicuous to draw attention to himself. But then, an uncomfortable feeling suddenly arose within him, a feeling that wasn't his own. He realized that perhaps a part of Butao's memories and emotions still lingered, making all his troubles pile up even more. Still, he decided to ignore it and head to class because there might still be a chance to log out. After all, he had been transported into this world in a way he couldn't understand. But now, as Butao, the world of Dunex was no longer the same. The plot would be broken, but he still hoped he could improve his relationship with Kaoru. As he stepped through the classroom door, Kaoru's eyes turned toward him, sparking a glimmer of hope in him. Until she glared, her eyes filled with hatred. That confirmed for him that reconciliation would be difficult. Sucked into another world for the first time, the protagonist began with a sense of disappointment as he entered the classroom, seeing Kaoru turn her face away with a disgusted expression, her chin resting on her hand. The black-haired boy found himself in a state between laughter and tears, muttering to himself as he saw the clear hatred Kaoru had for Butao. He, now named Butao, understood that the seating was arranged by test scores, which meant you couldn't just sit wherever you wanted. Finding his nameplate, he realized his seat was placed in the farthest corner, like a brand marking his lowly position. So, another problem was piled onto the previous difficulties, and he knew he was the lowest-ranked student. But this was a prestigious adventure academy with an entrance exam 100 times harder than other schools. An ultra-elite institution. He had no idea how Butao had managed to pass that exam and get accepted here. Just getting into the school was a miracle in itself. So he told himself he should try to be a little more confident. His train of thought was cut short by the sound of someone else's footsteps entering the classroom. The man asked everyone to take their seats. To begin the first orientation session, he gave a simple self-introduction and then began to explain about the school. It was Murai Hajime, an alumnus of the Adventurer University. Everything seemed to be following the usual Dunx script. This was definitely a Dunx script. But the young man was seeing it all firsthand and realized everything had a distinctly different, information-dense feel to it. He could feel the weight of every word Murai spoke, along with the excitement of his classmates. But that was exactly how it should be. When it came to adventurers in this world, it was a glamorous and promising profession reserved for those capable of exploring dungeons. However, the competition at this school was incredibly fierce. Just being a student here came with its own special privileges. However, our protagonist already knew most of this, though it all still felt unreal to him. Still, he couldn't return to his old world for a while, and it was probably for the best if he started seriously thinking about his career in this one. Fortunately, as expected of a prestigious school, there were plenty of options after graduation, such as being recruited, since students would participate in dungeon explorations as part of their lessons. The Dunex school took its name from its theme of dungeon exploration. Intense focus was necessary because resources from the dungeons helped support the energy industry and were a valuable resource for companies and organizations wanting to advance their dungeon research. This was the ideal place to hunt for future opportunities, and our protagonist wanted to dive in deeper, with more determination. But hardships were waiting for him. The teacher told the class they had teammates to cooperate with, and then began distributing devices to everyone. When the young man's name was called, as expected, he thought that if he could just return to his old world, all his worries would become meaningless. The device looked like a wristwatch and was the menu in Dunx, with features like a normal smartphone and many others, such as checking your status and logging out. When he opened the device, the screen displayed his own status. But his stats were extremely low. This just made him even more frustrated, as the difficulties kept piling on. He was still hoping for a logout function, but unfortunately, there wasn't one. Meanwhile, in Class D, the teacher had left, and everyone was still sitting quietly in their seats. A short-haired male student was lying in someone's lap, and one student asked the other how long he should sit there. The man with long black hair replied, "Until Korea wakes up." He told everyone to relax since they would be leaving soon. Back in Class E, our protagonist felt sad, not knowing how to return, but this was his dream. Even if he had been transported to this world in the body of Butao, while checking his status, he discovered he had the skill Glutton. But despite having played Dunx for years, he had no idea what it was. Getting a skill right from the start was rare, but he didn't understand how to use it and briefly thought it might be a skill for eating large amounts of food, making him wonder if it appeared because he was a little overweight. His thoughts were quickly interrupted when he saw a group of people walk into the classroom with serious expressions, one of whom shouted, demanding everyone's attention. He introduced the tall man as being from Class A to D and that his name was Korea Isamu. He then announced that Korea would be choosing one of them to be his subordinate, ordering everyone to display their statuses and skills. Suddenly, a voice rang out from Kaoru, who stood up, saying that their class had no reason to show off their skills, causing the others to agree with confidence. The male student from that group frowned, asking who the girl was and reminding the class of their place, before approaching her and asking if she thought they were equals. As his class had been exploring dungeons since they were 12 years old, the tall man said that their levels were on a completely different plane and that his word was law. An intimidating aura emanated from him, spreading throughout the classroom, enveloping everyone, including our protagonist. The effect made the young man realize what was happening, but everyone saw that Kaoru was heavily affected by this aura and decided to back down. The male student asked if anyone else wanted to complain, but the young man understood that this aura skill was a special ability, one that could be used in places like dungeons to intimidate those with lower levels. His thoughts were interrupted when the large man called out, demanding to see Sota's stats first. The young man looked towards Sota, a male student who also had a rather chubby figure, surprised to hear the man call him fatty. But even so, he stood up and held up his device to display his stats. With a sneer, the male student said that Sota's stats were too low and that they had no use for him, making Sota want to punch him right then and there. However, Sota decided to play the part of a weakling for now. The man proceeded to call on the next student. This time, a female student with long hair, a timid face, and an attractive figure. The girl was sweating, her hands trembling as a long, black-haired student asked for her name. After a moment of hesitation, she replied that she was Sanju Sakurako. The man asked her to show her device as expected, but the protagonist recognized the girl by her nickname, Pink, because of her pink hair. She was one of the main heroines in Dunx, and also a special character who could be played from her own perspective. It was because of her that the male protagonist's route could be unlocked, and she was one of the reasons Dunx became such a huge hit. The long, black-haired student checked Pink's device and saw that she was only level 1, just as expected. Though her abilities were still unclear, he gave a sinister smile and declared he would grant her a special privilege, inviting her to their group because she was beautiful. Pink didn't know how to react and began to tremble, just as the rest of the class was paralyzed by the overwhelming difference in power. Even if everyone in Class E joined forces, they still couldn't defeat Korea. However, the protagonist knew that Pink wouldn't be taken by these guys so easily, even as the long, black-haired student reached for the girl, asking why she was reacting so negatively when she should be happy. But his hand was caught by another male student from the class, who shot him an angry glare and shouted that it was obvious she didn't like it. This was the scene where the game's protagonist made his appearance. Kaoru stood there, stunned, wondering why she had even enrolled in the Adventurers Academy in the first place. Her eyes widened, looking towards the red-haired male student, who had just stopped the long, black-haired man. The other one, Daikura, felt a vein pop in angry confusion, snatching his hand back and questioning the red-haired student's words, trying to argue that Sanju was happy about it, though that was clearly not true. After asking for the red-haired student's name, he introduced himself as Akagi Yuma, declaring that he would soon become the strongest person in the school. Model? Everyone was surprised by this declaration, and some even widened their eyes, while 2 others in the group burst out laughing, mocking the red-haired boy. But Korea seemed particularly affected by those words, exuding a threatening aura as he stood tall, facing Yuma with a sharp gaze. The whole class seemed to be crushed by this pressure, but Yuma remained standing, unfazed. Korea told Yuma he was just a kid who didn't know what a real adventurer was, advising him not to get too full of himself. The others in his group tried to calm Korea down, saying it was just nonsense from some Class E small fry. Hearing that, Korea calmed down and let out a breath, checked his equipment, and then asked Yuma if he would agree to a 1-month challenge to see who was the strongest. He explained that the challenge would be in the form of a duel with safety rules, ensuring that even if he lost, Yuma wouldn't lose his life. He added that in this school, there were many people as strong as monsters. If the red-haired boy couldn't defeat Korea, then he could clearly never call himself the strongest. Korea asked Yuma if he was wrong, but Yuma just clenched his fist and smirked, accepting the offer. Kaoru and the rest of Class E were surprised to see Yuma accept the challenge so easily and without a moment's hesitation, while Korea, so angry that a vein looked like it would pop on his forehead, stormed off, declaring he would remember these words, and that he hoped Yuma was prepared to lose an arm. As Korea left the classroom, Yuma stood in silence for a moment, leaving the space quiet, before his classmates began to cheer excitedly, praising him in awe. Their admiration surprised Yuma as they approached to continue praising him. Kaoru sat quietly, still processing what had just happened, listening to her classmates cheer and thank Yuma for protecting them. Yuma, with his noble demeanor, was exactly the kind of adventurer Kaoru had always admired, and the reason she had enrolled in the school. However, another part of the reason she chose this school was to get away from a certain man, her fiancé, Narumi Sota. Kaoru recalled a time when she and Sota were walking up the stairs to the school. She clutched the hem of her skirt, feeling as if eyes were on that area, and asked Sota why he was walking so far from her. The black-haired boy gently apologized, explaining he couldn't walk any faster. The girl felt that their relationship had been better when they were children, remembering a Sota who was a bit shy but much more honest than he was now. He always had a gentle smile whenever she was teased by other boys. Sota would even step in and try to protect her, but now he was just a shadow of his former self. Escaping him had become Kaoru's motivation to get into the adventurer's school. When she received her acceptance letter from the adventurer's school, Kaoru stared at the paper and then sank to the floor in shock, her face flushed with a faint smile on her lips. But then she got a call from Sota, telling her he had also been accepted. The boy told Kaoru he was looking forward to the next 3 years with her, and she hesitantly praised him for his achievement. Still, she found it hard to believe he had followed her to this extent. Sota's family ran a normal general store, and his parents and younger sister often worried about Kaoru, so Sota probably hadn't done anything illegal. This made her see Sota in a different light, if only for a moment. Later, when Kaoru won a national swordsmanship tournament, she was asked by Sota's parents to teach him swordsmanship. Kaoru agreed, a bit reluctantly. Sometimes, Sota himself would ask for training, and now Kaoru couldn't refuse since Sota's parents had always been kind to her since childhood. She saw it as a reward for him passing the entrance exam. When they started running together, Kaoru wondered how much effort this lazy friend of hers had put in, and it impressed her quite a bit. Everything seemed fine until they actually got into the training phase, which required sacrifice and lifestyle changes. However, Sota refused to restrict his diet or wake up early. Even when he did wake up early to run with Kaoru, he quickly grew exhausted and immediately suggested stopping, making the excuse that his stamina would increase as he leveled up. Kaoru tried to explain to him that from level 4 onwards, leveling up would get much harder, but Sota cut her off, saying he could just train more once he leveled up. The girl narrowed her eyes, listening to him complain in frustration and exhaustion that he had already tried so hard just to get into the school and wondering why he had to suffer even more. Kaoru believed that getting into the adventurer school was something to be proud of. But if Sota kept arguing with upperclassmen like this, the school wouldn't just let it slide. She knew Sota thought she would apologize and adjust her pace to his. But that's how it had always been between them. Kaoru believed that Sota had become this way, partly because of her. But she thought it was time to change that perspective. If that was the case, she decided she would gradually distance herself from him. She told him she was leaving him behind and started to run ahead, ignoring Sota's calls echoing from behind her. All Kaoru could do was lower her head, a look of disappointment on her face, because she felt there was nothing she could do to change him. Back in the present, Kaoru stood up from her seat and glanced over at Yuma, silently wishing that Sota had the same kind of courage as the red-haired boy. Our protagonist just sat at his desk, silently flipping through his papers until someone interrupted him. And that person was Kaoru. She looked down at him, her brows furrowed in confusion, asking what was wrong with him today. He didn't know how to respond, thinking that she hated him, but she crossed her arms, growing even more confused, and asked why he wasn't saying anything. Sota began to stammer, trying to think of something to say, and lied to Kaoru, telling her he remembered something he needed to do for the day. She let out a quiet scoff, pondering his apology and excuse, then turned away, reluctantly accepting that. It had been 2 weeks since they started training, but Sota showed no signs of wanting to continue. Kaoru thought it was time to stop the training, as it seemed she was only continuing because she had promised Sota's parents. Even though she found it pointless, her feelings for Sota had completely vanished. Her priority now was to level up as quickly as possible. She no longer had free time to spend with Sota, and to improve her own life, She needed to resolve her biggest and most difficult problem as soon as possible. The reason she and Sota were engaged was because of a magical marriage contract that had been signed. And as long as it existed, she couldn't escape this bond. Kaoru believed that sooner or later, Sota would desire her body and might even order her to do indecent things. So before that could happen, she needed to void the marriage contract as soon as possible. Glancing at the red-haired boy, she thought it was time for the plot to move forward. Meanwhile, Sota, after enrolling in the Adventures Academy, as the player, there's usually a visit to the heroine Hayase Kaoru's house, but as Sota was on his way there, he happened to pass by his family's general store, where everything looked just as it always had. He hesitated, wondering if he should enter the house. That was technically his, but felt completely unfamiliar. His thoughts were interrupted when he felt a touch on his shoulder. It was his mother, who was surprised to see him home so early. Sota was stunned to see his mother and his little sister, who happily greeted him with excitement. The heartwarming sight moved Sota, and tears welled up in his eyes. He went up to his room, knowing without a doubt that this was Narumi Sota's room. Or at least, it was supposed to be. It made him feel a strange sense of nostalgia looking at his messy room and his family. He figured this feeling was due to the influence of Butao's memories, since in the game, these two were Butao's family, and this world was filling in the missing information he had never seen in the game. However, Sota felt that this might not be a good thing. The advantage of being the player seemed huge, but now it was likely to become useless. He wanted to explore a dungeon quickly to test something out. As he walked through the room, another feeling emerged, causing him to look back at the pile of trash and junk scattered on the floor. It was too messy and dirty to ignore, so Sota decided to prioritize cleaning it up first. He went to find the vacuum cleaner and started cleaning for the next hour. It was a strange feeling. He had no trouble finding things, as if he vaguely knew where everything was, which made Butao's memories feel less like a nuisance. He thought that maybe one day he'd be able to recall things he wanted at will, as he was still bothered by Kaoru's earlier invitation. While cleaning, Sota happened to discover a magic contract between himself and Kaoru, but it looked like a childish scribble. He tried to focus on Butao's memories, hoping to understand more about its origin, and saw a flash of a memory of himself writing the contract with Kaoru sitting beside him. Even though it was just a glimpse, he was glad to understand the importance of this contract to him. As he finished cleaning, Sota decided it was time to enter the dungeon. Wearing a tracksuit and carrying a staff for combat, he entered the building and told the staff he wanted to register. The woman behind the counter looked him over, seemingly unimpressed with his appearance, but still accepted and asked for his documents. Upon seeing his bracelet, she immediately recognized him as a student from the Explorer School and changed her attitude, becoming more respectful. Sota noticed she was still looking at him with disappointment and doubt, as if she couldn't believe someone like him could explore a dungeon. He brushed the thought aside and headed toward the dungeon. Observing his surroundings while he waited, he saw a vast, pitch-black void that he was about to step through. Finally, he stepped through, entering the dungeon. The sensation of passing through the barrier between the outside world and the dungeon was strange, almost like entering a tourist attraction, so he decided to venture deeper in. He walked for a long time and found himself in a more deserted area. But then he sensed something forming behind him. A slime. This was typically an easy monster to deal with, which made Sota smile when he saw it. He readied his staff and immediately swung it hard, causing the slime to explode, and a crystal flew out, bouncing onto the ground. Sota sat down, panting but smiling with satisfaction, thrilled to experience his first real dungeon battle, confirming that he was truly in the world of Dunx. Although the level-up rate was quite low at the early levels, there was something he wanted to try. Everything felt a bit familiar, as if he were looking at a map. Eventually, he found a slime room he recognized, a place where slimes could merge and grow, making it ideal for grinding levels. When he approached a slime, it cowered at his presence and the motion of his swinging staff, even though he intentionally missed. He started running away to lure it, just as he intended, watching as other slimes gradually merged with it, becoming a larger, more powerful monster. Soda charged forward and swung his staff powerfully, defeating the giant monster with ease, like a true Dun-X player. Soda decided to let his instincts guide him, believing that as long as he kept swinging his staff, he could overcome anything. Finally, when he looked up, he saw he had reached level 2, causing him to sit down on the rocky ground and let out a sigh of relief. Leveling up felt amazing, but he immediately felt a surge of power spread through his body, surprising him. It was the feeling of his stats increasing, and he realized he could get addicted to the sensation. Soda didn't want to brag, but now he no longer felt inferior in his class. Still, something felt a little strange to him. In the early stages, all players would normally use the slime room to grind levels, but right now it was empty, which confused him. Anyway, he decided not to worry about it since the place still let him in, and it seemed no one was forbidding him from being here, so it was the perfect spot for experimenting. He began to stretch and thought about the skill system in Dun-X. The basic rule about skills was that if a person didn't upgrade them, they couldn't use them. However, there were 3 exceptional skills that any player could use from the very beginning. The first was a skill that the boys from Class A to D often used, Aura. The second was the ability to create a light source, like a torch. And the last was a minor healing skill. Soda knew that for now, he could only use these 3 skills. Normally, he would activate them by pressing a hotkey or moving his body in a certain way, which was called manual activation. When he tested the manual activation for all 3 skills, everything went better than expected. Soda wanted to try something else and figured it would be fine. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then held his staff high in the air and shouted loudly, "Void Slash!" Silence fell as nothing happened, just as he expected since he hadn't learned the skill yet. But what surprised him was a brilliant light that appeared from behind, followed by a dazzling beam that shot forward, leaving Soda astonished as the recoil knocked him back a few steps. Meanwhile, the other students were continuing their own dungeon explorations. The long, black-haired male student who had stormed into Class E earlier had apparently been exploring dungeons since he was 12, in his first year of middle school. Even though they were trained in a harsh environment, people still risked their lives when entering a dungeon. This person was only a D rank, nearly the lowest rank in Class D, but he still pushed forward, holding on to his pride because there was still the inferior Class E below him. Suddenly, a group of medics rushed by with an unconscious Soda on a stretcher. After waking up in the guild's infirmary, Soda, confused, asked where he was. The nurse explained that he had suffered from magical exhaustion and was found unconscious near a group of slimes, which made Soda blush in embarrassment, before he brushed it off by saying he had just gotten lost and was tired. The next day, Soda woke up and left the dungeon in the evening, reflecting on the day before. He didn't want to tell the nurse the truth, that he had accidentally activated a skill he had never learned, for fear of being called insane. As he continued his journey home, Soda recalled that he was currently dealing with 4 debuffs. His body being hated by one of the original story's main characters, the fragmented memories of Butao that occasionally resurfaced, his low stats, and it seemed this world was about to add a 5th debuff to the list. When he returned home, his family quickly served dinner, making Soda realize why this body had reached its current weight. He apologized to his family and asked them to reduce his portion sizes, which surprised everyone. His mother hesitantly mentioned that she had cooked his favorite dish and asked what was wrong. Soda tried to explain that he wanted to go on a diet and switch to eating more vegetables, which surprised his little sister. He said that ever since joining the adventurer's school, he had to be more mindful of his weight. His father admitted he did seem a bit chubby, but his sister insisted he was perfect just the way he was. 1 month from that day would be the match between Korea and Yuma, and all of Class E seemed to be trembling in anticipation of this event. Even if they overcame the Korea incident, The story would continue with everyone preparing for a global-scale war. Soda wanted to start getting ready for all of that too. He needed to level up to gather more information about this world and the strange phenomena that had happened to him, like the mystery of being transported into Butao's body and any other information he could find. But that might be difficult, especially with his family, which led to Soda staying up late taking notes on everything. Although he still didn't know why or how he was transported to this world, the first thing he wanted to understand was how he had managed to activate an unlearned skill the day before, something that should have been impossible. The ability to do something he originally couldn't was a good thing, but he wondered if others could do the same, and if he was the only one. It could throw the plot into chaos. If the story deviated from what he knew, that would also be a problem for Soda. His next priority was to train his skills, so he would head to the guild again, even though the tasks he needed to do were piling up. The next morning, his mother stopped him and asked if he was really okay to go out today. After what had happened yesterday, Soda tried to reassure his mother that he was fine. Just as his little sister ran in, begging to come with him, Soda shut the door before she could step outside. He headed to the guild, accidentally bumping into someone and quickly apologizing, until he realized it was the long-haired bully from before. This just made Soda feel tired, as he didn't want any more trouble, but he was surprised when the guy asked about the person behind him. Turning around, Soda saw his little sister. She told the bully that he should apologize for bumping into someone, causing him to glare at her. Soda quickly told her to stop, but the other guy quickly walked away, looking annoyed, telling Soda to do his best in the first class. The two siblings sighed in relief before arguing about whether she should have followed him, making Soda realize things were getting more complicated. He didn't want his sister to see his skills, fearing it would just fuel her desire for adventure. So, Soda agreed to let her register with him, but explained that kids her age couldn't enter the dungeons. She seemed to be thinking it over, and suddenly ran off with a wave. Now Soda could get back to his plan. He went to the library to figure out why his skill had activated. Normally, skills were activated automatically, through a hotkey or by manual casting, like he did before. He started by looking into automatic activation and discovered it was simply a matter of praying. However, when he looked up manual casting, he couldn't find any information on it at all. It seemed that using unlearned skills wasn't normal in this world, leading Soda to believe he might be the only one with this ability. Just then, Soda wondered if he could swap places with Yuma, but he had a feeling it was impossible. Even though he didn't fully understand this world, he noticed more students from his school in the library than usual. His thoughts were interrupted when the bully showed up again, approaching him and glancing at the books. He guessed Soda didn't know how to use his skills, and sneered that learning how might finally help him beat a single slime. These words left Soda completely confused, and outside the guild, his little sister was squatting on the ground, overhearing other students talking about how Soda was apparently taken out by a slime. They couldn't understand how he'd even gotten into the school, prompting her to approach them to ask more about the story. Back in the library, Soda asked the bully what he was talking about, and he explained that apparently the whole school knew he'd been carried out of an area filled with nothing but slimes. Hearing this, Soda felt the life drain out of him, but the bully cut through his thoughts and asked if he needed protection. Soda knew this just meant they needed a baggage carrier. In Class D, only a few got to be gophers or errand boys, so Soda tried to refuse politely. However, this only made the bully decide to use his aura skill. The pressure only affected Soda, and he couldn't resist it in his current state. The bully sneered, saying Soda was just some Class E nobody and had no right to refuse, that he was the weakest one in the room and was worthless in the school. Every word made Soda feel like he was sinking deeper, agreeing with the assessment that he truly was nothing. The skill he was so proud of and his self-confidence had all but vanished. He had no place in the school, and everyone probably wished he would just disappear. As the bully's words echoed, everyone gathered around, laughing and mocking Soda because this world was just that cruel. Something Soda understood better than anyone. Tears began to well up in his eyes as he laughed sadly to himself. The bully shouted for everyone to look at the weakling crying. But just then, his little sister ran in, telling him to get away from her brother. Model! Soda's eyes widened, as if realizing there was still something for him to hold on to in this world, a place for him. She stood trembling before him, placing a hand on the bully's chest. He stopped in surprise before she took her brother's hand, about to leave. Soda could feel his sister trembling, but the moment was cut short when the upperclassman grabbed her by the collar, pulling her close with a threatening gaze, asking if she thought she could just walk away so easily. A surge of anger flared up inside Soda, but his brave little sister stood her ground. Despite the fear creeping into her heart, Soda tried to tell his sister to apologize, seeing the upperclassman use his aura skill on both of them. Though tears began to fall, she still stood firm, making the bully even angrier, raising his fist as if to strike her. Seeing this, Soda panicked and apologized profusely, promising he would make his sister say sorry as he screamed at her, watching the tears stream down her face. In that instant, as if compelled by some force from within, Soda felt his body lunge forward on its own, slamming into the upperclassman's stomach. Realizing what he had just done, Soda began to worry, knowing this action wasn't entirely his own but a surge of Butao's emotions. The bully smirked in anger, thinking both siblings were now defying him, then grabbed Soda by the tie, making him flinch in terror. The people around them began to whisper, but Soda slowly regained his senses, remembering the moment his sister stood up for him. Although partly influenced by Butao's emotions, his next action was entirely his own. Soda gripped the bully's arm, tried to activate his aura, and spoke loudly, telling the bully to let go while mocking his weight. Unfortunately, the magic didn't work. And just as the bully was about to throw a punch at Soda, someone else stepped in, separating them and saying they'd caused enough trouble. The woman in armor asked if she could fight in Soda's place, leaving them both confused and silent. That's when Soda recognized the girl in front of him. The bully looked surprised for a moment, asking her why she wanted to interfere, calling her by name and pointing out her high status in the school. Tenma Akira. The woman in armor thought for a moment, then explained that she wanted everyone to get along since they were both her colleagues. She cheerfully asked if they could do that, which made the bully fall silent. Soda looked over at him with an uneasy expression. Though reluctant, the bully had no choice but to agree, telling Soda he would remember this moment before leaving with a threat. Korea breathed a sigh of relief after the tense situation. But Soda's focus was on remembering Tenma Akira. She was a powerful individual, ranked second in their year, and always wore thick metal armor because of a rumor that she was cursed with an overweight body. Tenma Akira turned to Sota, pulling him from his thoughts. Startling him, she gave him a thumbs up, encouraging him that he'd done well to stand his ground, along with his little sister. After saying that, she hurriedly left to avoid being found by her family, leaving Soda alone as he collapsed to his knees from the stress. Just then, his little sister rushed over, crying, thanking him for standing up for her, just as she had done for him. Soda wanted to thank her too, but he suddenly realized everyone in the library was staring, making him think it was better to go somewhere else. The two of them left the library. Sunlight broke through the clouds as they sat on a bench outside the guild, talking. Soda was confused to see his sister back so soon, especially since he'd advised her to register with the guild if she wanted to explore dungeons that badly. But his sister simply replied that she never intended to join the guild at all. This stunned Soda, but she explained that she already knew from the beginning that high school students weren't allowed in dungeons. However, she still wanted to go, because her dream was to become an adventurer. As she said this, she pumped her fist in the air to show her determination. Soda looked at his sister, surprised, and paused for a moment, baffled by her stubbornness. His sister blushed with embarrassment and confessed she only wanted to get his attention. Ever since the school entrance ceremony, he had become so cool in her eyes. but he'd stop calling her by her name. Feeling terrible for lying, she apologized to him, made Sota feel something stir inside him, urging him to do something to make the little girl happy. He pushed the feeling away, realizing it was Butao's emotion, as it seemed this person cared deeply for his sister. Sota wondered if Butao was a good person and started to feel a little guilty for borrowing his body. Afterward, he apologized to his sister and promised to pay more attention to her, calling her by her name, Kano, and telling her not to do anything dangerous again. He wondered if that was how Butao would have acted, but it seemed he did the right thing when he saw Kano smile and agree. She suggested they go home together. Sota looked at his sister in disbelief and told her to go on ahead, because he wanted to go into the dungeon to level up some more. Later that day, when it got dark, he returned home with a few injuries, making his parents worry and check on him thoroughly. Sota reassured his mother that he was fine, but she clasped her hands, explaining that Kano was upset because she couldn't go into the dungeon with him. Looking over at his sister, Sota saw her mumbling with a disappointed look on her face. When he tried to talk to her, she just shook her head, until he promised that one day he would take her into the dungeon. That promise made Kono immediately run to him in excitement, but he reminded her that would only happen when she actually got into the adventurer's school, which made the little girl frown for a moment. After that, the whole family had dinner together. Sometime later, Sota ran into the bully again and humbled himself before him, leaving the bully completely confused. At school, the students of Class E were often treated poorly, and Sota's previous behavior had drawn even more attention to him. Tenma Akira's intervention had made the bullying pointless. But the real issue was that Sota had dared to stand up to the bully in that situation. As Sota continued to bow and apologize, the bully told him to shut up because his voice was too loud, reminding him that he didn't actually mean any harm, but didn't want to be defied, as that was the image he wanted to build. After that, he suggested they go somewhere else to talk, and Sota agreed. Sota's goal wasn't to have a happy isekai life. His first desire was to investigate what was going on, because he longed to return to his previous world. His other goal was to create a place for people like him and to protect this family, and maybe even repay Butao. Starting next Monday, school would officially begin. So in the short term, his goal was to level up, to gain the strength to protect himself and his family from the events to come. When the day to return to school came, someone came knocking on Sota's door. Kano called out to him but didn't clearly describe the person at the door, leaving him confused, until he opened the door and was surprised to see it was Karu. It seemed Sota would be in a group with Karu and Yuma, but how did he end up in this situation? Before heading to school, Sota tried to search through Butao's memories and realized that he and Karu apparently had a mysterious promise to go to school together, and now it was happening. He walked a few steps behind Karu, with neither of them saying a word, making the atmosphere awkward. Even so, Sota knew that Karu was the one most uncomfortable with the silence, but she was still trying to faithfully keep her promise to him. Sota wondered if Butao would have been the one to start a conversation. He decided to give it a try, trying to think of a common topic, but Karu suddenly stopped in the middle of the road. Model. Without turning back, she said she'd heard a rumor that he was defeated by a single slime, and then kept walking, leaving Sota there, annoyed that his former bully had spread the rumor. Karu stopped again, this time turning around to apologize before explaining that she and Yuma had formed a party, and she wanted to let him know why she couldn't join his. She figured he might be wondering about it, since they used to be pretty close. Hearing this, Sota felt a strange sensation run through his body, one that was becoming familiar. It was Butao reacting negatively to the news. He remembered that in the story, Karu would join Yuma's party early on and they would save the world together, getting close enough for her to call him by his first name. This made Sota feel a little sorry for Butao. As he walked into the classroom, he saw everything was proceeding just like in the game, which put him at ease. But just then, a grumble echoed through the room as he appeared, reminding him that he wasn't exactly welcome here. Sota turned, a confused look on his face, as someone approached and said they'd heard a rumor that he'd been defeated by a single slime. Immediately, others started whispering and snickering, and Soda grew angry at the barrage of mockery. Kaoru looked like she was about to say something, but Yuma quickly stepped in, telling everyone to stop and apologizing to Soda, explaining that everyone was just on edge from what happened on Friday, himself included. Soda looked up at Yuma, remembering that in the game, the player experiences the story through Yuma's consciousness. But now, things were reversed, and if Soda got too close to Yuma, he might derail the original story, just as he'd seen happen a moment ago. As he mulled over the need for caution, he noticed the class was still whispering and tossing insults his way, but Yuma told him to ignore them. Sota remembered that at this point in the story, he wasn't supposed to be called Butao yet, and wondered if that was because Yuma had intervened. Still, the feeling of being an outcast hadn't changed. As class began, the teacher reminded everyone they needed to form parties for dungeon explorations, which would be essential for their upcoming lessons. The teacher asked everyone to reintroduce themselves, which Soda found exciting, thinking it was a chance to get acquainted with everyone. The teacher decided to go in order of their scores, starting with Yuma, who stood up and introduced himself, saying he was from Tokyo and used a one-handed sword. Kaoru went next with her introduction, and the rest of the class followed one by one. When it was Soda's turn, he felt tense. He'd only said the word, "yeah," all morning, to avoid derailing the story. However, he knew he needed to be more approachable to find a party, so he decided to try acting cheerful. When his turn came, Soda loudly announced his name, clasped his fists together, and started swinging them in the air like a baseball bat, proclaiming it to be his weapon of choice. He then declared he was a monk in training and flashed a peace sign in front of his face. In that moment, Soda froze, realizing how utterly weird he must have looked. The entire class fell into a bewildered silence. Kaoru sat frozen at her desk, covering her face to hide her secondhand embarrassment. The teacher announced the start of orientation, explaining that the facilities around the guild could be used even after graduation. The students began filing out, chatting amongst themselves to quickly form parties, while Soda was left standing there, still stuck in his pose, feeling like he'd passed the point of no return. He clenched his fists, telling himself that going solo wouldn't be so bad. After catching up with the other students, the teacher led them to an arena, a place where they could practice their magic and get accustomed to their powers, and then mentioned the infirmary for treating any injuries. Finally, the teacher reminded everyone that for the first few floors of the dungeon, they should stick with their teammates, even if they already had some exploring experience. The requirement to form groups of 3 to 5 people made Soda want to take down the teacher right then and there. As the teacher explained that it was a mandatory procedure, the teacher told everyone to gather in front of the guild in an hour, and then walked away, leaving the students scrambling around, trying to find a team. Soda realized he wasn't the only one who was worried, as everyone was eager to form a team quickly and start leveling up. Determined to try his luck, Soda went around asking a few people. But all he got back were sneers, rejections, or excuses that their teams were already full. Feeling disappointed that no one wanted to team up with him, he realized that everyone had already chosen their friends based on existing relationships, and no one wanted to party up with a failure like him. Soda saw a group of female students talking to Yuma and thought he already had his group until he was surprised to see Yuma turn down their invitation. Yuma then ran over to Soda, waving cheerfully and asking if he wanted to team up with him. Soda couldn't believe his ears, wondering if Yuma's offer was some kind of cruel joke. He didn't want the story to be ruined by continuing to interact with Yuma, because his survival in this world depended on his knowledge from the game. If Yuma's actions caused Dunx to change, then Soda would have nothing left to rely on. He was about to politely refuse and use Koru as an excuse, but he knew that wouldn't make her happy. Glancing over, Soda saw Kaoru running towards them, hoping she would take Yuma away. But his worst nightmare came true when she suggested joining their group. And so, Soda found himself walking behind Yuma and Kaoru, listening to them chat, wondering why he was in this group when Kaoru clearly wanted nothing to do with him. He was about to ask Yuma how he was doing, but Kaoru's warning glare seemed to tell him not to do anything stupid around Yuma, making him instantly shut up as he remembered that if this were the real Butao, he would get jealous of Yuma and might even attack him. Kaoru was right to warn him not to act rashly. However, he wasn't the real Butao. Just then, Yuma turned to him and asked if Soda had something to say, which made Soda suddenly remember that they weren't complete strangers. Even though Kaoru was being cautious, he simply asked Yuma why he wanted to become an adventurer. Yuma thought for a moment before answering that it was because he'd admired them since he was a kid, from seeing adventurers on TV. And then he laughed and apologized, saying his answer probably didn't make much sense. Soda sat there, surprised, remembering that in the game, Yuma was just a vessel for the player, but the Yuma in this world was different. He had his own motivations and stood firm in scary situations, even though he was just a high school freshman. This time, Soda didn't just want to support the character, he wanted to support Yuma as a person. He said that Yuma's words were something to be treasured, which made Kaoru look at him with a confused expression, seeing him act a little out of character. Yuma tried to be modest, but there was no turning back now. When the group reached the second floor, the teacher announced that they were now free to act on their own as a team, as long as they weren't late for class the next day. Soda was about to go rent a weapon, but Yuma stopped him. The red-haired boy said that he and his group were planning to explore the third floor, and then asked if Soda wanted to join their group. One more time. A few days ago, at Hayase Pavilion, Kaoru soaked in the bath, trying to relax and wash away her recent stress, but the feeling of anxiety just wouldn't disappear. After getting out of the tub and quickly getting dressed, a towel still wrapped around her head, Kaoru received a notification, news that Soda had been defeated by a slime. This made her decide to visit his house. The girl rang the doorbell, and Kano opened the door. The little girl scowled when she saw Kaoru, but Kaoru tried to remain polite and greeted Soda's younger sister. She said she heard that Soda had been hospitalized, but was cut off when Kano insisted that her brother was fine. Kaoru couldn't hide her worry, asking again if Soda was injured, but was once again cut off by Kano, who stressed that he was okay. The little girl ran back into the house, shouting to let her brother know that person is here again, which left Kaoru a bit bewildered. However, this wasn't entirely unexpected, because Kaoru had been treating Soda coldly since spring break, so Kano's reaction was understandable. Soon after, Soda came to the door, surprised to see Kaoru standing there, as she greeted him reluctantly. In her heart, Kaoru truly wanted to cancel the magical marriage contract between them, thinking it would be better for both of them if they kept their distance. She wondered if she should just come right out and say she wanted to end the engagement, but feared that doing so would only make Soda more stubborn. Remembering their promise to walk to school together, Kaoru decided to go through with her plan, telling Soda they needed to leave right away, even though he hadn't finished his breakfast. As they walked together, Kaoru would occasionally glance back at Soda, noticing he'd seemed strange ever since the entrance ceremony, as if he was acting with a certain lack of conviction. Kaoru recalled that, usually at the beginning of a break, Butao would always be all over her, demanding to know why she wasn't answering his calls, and she would usually make the excuse that she was busy studying. Butao would argue back, asking if studying was more important than his childhood friend, which flustered her and made her unconsciously cover her chest when she noticed his staring gaze. Kaoru would hastily say that wasn't it. She was surprised that he was no longer persistently calling her and no longer stared at her like he used to. Kaoru wondered if he could really change so quickly, or if he had simply lost interest in her. With this question in mind, Kaoru decided to test him by mentioning the rumor that he was defeated by a slime, then explained that she and Yuma were now in the same group. She clenched her fists, turning back to wait for his angry reaction, but Soda just smiled and said cheerfully that it was reassuring for her to have Yuma by her side. Kaoru knew Soda wasn't the type of person who could hide his feelings, so this made her wonder if he had truly lost interest in her. She knew she should be happy about it, But it still felt a little strange as they walked into their classroom together. Upon entering the classroom, Sota was approached by a few other students, who brought up the rumors. And everyone started whispering and mocking him. Kaoru stood there, listening to their sarcastic remarks, but felt she had to do something, since they were childhood friends, after all. Kaoru was about to speak up, but Yuma took the initiative and approached him in a friendly manner, which surprised her. She had wanted to team up with someone like Yuma ever since he stood up to Korea. But Kaoru suddenly remembered the magical contract between her and Sota, and the faint memories of its terms, including the penalties. While browsing the rental weapons at the guild, Kaoru was approached by Yuma, who proposed they form a party. This left her confused until Yuma explained he was impressed that she was the first one to speak out against Class D. Even with the contract, there was no penalty stopping her from forming her own party. And the truth was, Kaoru didn't hate Sota. She just believed she could focus better without him around. Yuma and Kaoru's party was joined by two new members, Tachigi Naoto and Sanjo Sakuranko, who would provide ranged support and healing. They needed to level up and get stronger, because Yuma's match against Korea was in 1 month, and Korea was likely already over level 10. Leveling up wasn't just about getting stronger. It would also allow them to choose a suitable class. Currently, none of them had chosen a class, so they needed to decide quickly in the short time they had left. Kaoru felt more confident in this party, especially since they had a secret weapon in Yuma. Joining the group with Yuma and Sota, her main motivation was to be closer to Yuma, not Sota. As the party made their way through the dungeon, Kaoru tried to start a conversation with Yuma about potential improvements they could make. Yuma was about to reply, but then he suddenly changed the subject, which confused Kaoru, until she realized he was probably trying to be considerate of Sota, who was rumored to have been defeated by a single slime. Yuma turned to Sota and asked if he had anything he wanted to say, surprising Kaoru with how direct the question was. She glanced at Sota, hoping he wouldn't say anything weird. Sota then asked Yuma why he wanted to become an adventurer. Yuma simply replied that it was out of admiration, and Kaoru wanted to add something too, thinking that was what motivated her as well. But she knew the truth was that her main drive was to put some distance between herself and Sota, which wouldn't be very polite to say out loud. After their first trip into the dungeon, Yuma returned to his original group and announced he wanted to invite one more person to the party, asking for their opinions. Kaoru knew he was talking about Sota. Naoto adjusted his glasses, saying that while he respected Yuma's decision, he was hesitant to welcome someone like Sota, who was rumored to have lost to a slime. He was worried about how their classmates would see them, and also about what Sota himself would think of the offer. Yuma, well aware of this, explained that he wanted to support Sota because the ultimate goal was to defeat Korea, and he believed that if everyone helped each other, nothing else would matter. When Yuma asked for Kaoru's opinion, she replied that she didn't like the idea, but didn't want to get into the details of her relationship with Sota, especially since he seemed to have lost interest in her anyway. She decided to put her faith in Yuma, since there was no reason Sota would turn down the offer. However, Sota unexpectedly refused, asking Yuma why he wanted him in the party, leaving both Kaoru and Yuma stunned. The red-haired boy explained that he respected Sota because of the praise he'd given him after he drove off Class D, and because Sota had encouraged him, saying his goal was a worthy one. Yuma was about to say more, but Sota cut him off, insisting that Yuma's first priority was his fight with Korea, not adding a burden like him to the party. He asked if Yuma was just trying to suck up to the teachers, and stressed that his participation would only make things worse. Model. Sota's refusal was even stronger, surprising Kaoru even more when she saw him brush Yuma's hand away and turn his back to leave. Sota used to be able to say such strong words so easily, but Kaoru realized that he had changed and wondered if she was the problem. Maybe thinking that Sota was interfering with Yuma was just her misunderstanding. And that made Kaoru start to feel that perhaps she had underestimated Sota. Soda decided to go through the dungeons by himself, knowing that he couldn't interact too much with the main characters if he wanted to keep the plot as close to the original as possible. While trying to train with his newly rented weapon, Soda was thrown back by the force of an attack from another monster, sending him tumbling across the ground. Even so, he struggled back to his feet, panting heavily, holding the staff in his hands with a focused gaze. Facing Soda was a monster with its jaws wide open, moving on all fours, advancing toward him. Soda charged forward, staff in hand, but the monster was also ready to attack, causing him to barely dodge its strike. After regaining his balance, he put all his strength into a swing of his staff, aiming straight for the monster's head, hitting it so hard that it exploded into a cloud of smoke. Soda landed on the ground, looked up, and realized he had leveled up to level 4. He looked ahead and saw the magic stone fall to the ground after the monster vanished. It had been a week since Soda was transported to the world of Dunex, and now he was at level 4, so he decided to explore alone to stay away from the main objectives of the story. Although this was a good stopping point, at his current level, Soda decided to try going down to the 5th floor to see how far he could go. He started down the long spiral staircase leading to the next floor. Soda clenched his fists, unable to believe he had reached level 4, but he also knew that things would get much harder from now on. Reaching level 4 allowed him to descend to the 5th floor, where leveling up would become much more difficult. And this was also the minimum requirement to become a professional adventurer. According to the plot of Dunex, many complex details had been established, and Soda was preparing to face one of them, a bridge spanning a deep chasm. He looked down into the abyss, knowing that falling down there meant certain death. But this very bridge was the key to his plan, as he intended to set a trap to level up faster. The idea was simple. Soda would cross the bridge, drawing the aggro of the orc monsters. When one orc used its war cry skill, the others would swarm towards him. At that point, Soda just needed to run back across the bridge, careful not to get caught, then cut the bridge's ropes while the monsters were chasing him, causing them to fall into the chasm. The orc's fall would count as if they were defeated by the player, earning Soda a huge amount of experience. He opened his status window to check his level and stats, but decided not to pull off this trick today, as it was already dark. He just planned to check the bridge first, eagerly awaiting tomorrow when he could put his plan into action. While walking down the dungeon corridor, Soda discovered another bridge, seeing that the gimmicks here were truly amazing and would be his main objective. But just then, he noticed something in the distance and immediately ran towards it. Before Soda's eyes was a pillar with a symbol he recognized as a teleportation gate. If it was like in the game, this gate would connect to the adventurer's school. And if he used it, each trip could save him an extra 4 hours of hunting. As a student, Soda knew he should feel grateful for this, but he couldn't help but feel it was strange when he looked around and realized no one else was using this gate. It wasn't just that the teleportation gate appeared in this area on the 5th floor. This emptiness was also present in the slime room on the 1st floor, where there wasn't another soul in sight. Similarly, the best hunting spots on the 2nd and 3rd floors were also completely empty. These were all places that could greatly help a player like Soda, but he decided to focus on testing the teleportation gate first. Soda raised his hand and placed it on the stone pillar, activating it just like he would in the game. It felt like a gust of wind rushed past, and a lattice of light appeared around the room. He looked around, realizing he had successfully activated the gate. Focusing energy into the hand resting on the pillar, he felt the energy from the stone pillar begin to radiate. When he looked up, Soda saw the space around him begin to change. Finally, Soda was teleported to an empty area with windows and a blackboard. It seemed to be an abandoned classroom. He left the room, stepped out into the stone-paved hallway, and went up the stairs. Everything looked very familiar, and he realized that these coordinates matched a location in the game, the basement of the Adventurer's School. Since it's a holiday, there are very few people here, and Soda planned to sneak out before being discovered. But things didn't go as smoothly as planned when his class teacher suddenly appeared behind him. asking what he was doing here on a day off. Soda froze, slowly turning to face the tall teacher, who was looking at him with a suspicious expression. Soda wondered if the teacher knew about the teleportation gate, feeling flustered by his question. He also realized the teacher's suspicious gaze. Might be because he wasn't supposed to be strong enough to get all the way down to the 5th floor. Still, Soda tried to act innocent, forcing a smile and explaining that he just remembered he'd forgotten something on Friday. And since he was on his way back from the dungeon anyway, he stopped by to look for it. But he hadn't expected to lose track of time. Soda paused for a moment, hoping his lie would fool the teacher, waiting nervously until Mr. Mirai simply reminded him to be more careful. In response, Soda realized that this teleportation gate really wasn't public knowledge. Otherwise, the teacher wouldn't have asked what he was doing here on a holiday. Although there was still a chance the teacher knew about the gate and was just ignoring it. Soda decided he would pretend everyone knew about it to avoid suspicion in the future. Regretfully, he decided to take the normal route the next day. The next day, Soda went down to the 5th floor and found the bridge he had seen before, excited to carry out his plan to trap the orcs to gain more experience and level up. He gently stepped onto the edge of the bridge, testing its stability, making sure he wouldn't fall into the deep chasm below. After slowly crossing the bridge and coming back, Soda gripped his weapon firmly and returned to the other side. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, sighing in relief when he saw the bridge was still holding firm. But now was when the real plan began. He moved into a dark corner, telling himself that while orcs were slow, their attack power was immense, so he had to be extremely careful. However, as Soda turned the corner of the hallway leading to the orcs, he was surprised to see a man bent over on the ground, clutching his stomach and groaning. The man weakly pleaded for help, and Soda immediately ran to him, worriedly asking if he was okay. But the man with glasses was only concerned about his friend's condition, grabbing Soda's shirt and begging him for help. Soda looked ahead and saw another person collapsed on the ground, surrounded by a horde of orcs, likely the body of a teammate. The horrific sight made Soda freeze, his body trembling, but he quickly regained his composure, advanced toward the orcs, and struck one of them in the back. The orcs immediately turned around, and Soda hoped he could lure them away from the dangerous area. He turned to the man with glasses, told him to hang on a little longer, then picked him up and ran. The orcs started to give chase, their echoing roars making tears stream down his face from the pressure. When he reached the head of the wooden bridge, Soda put the man down and quickly ran across it, drawing the full attention of the orcs. Once he reached the other side, he hastily tossed his staff aside, and in a moment of desperation, Soda pulled out a small knife and cut the rope on one side of the bridge. The orcs continued to charge forward, making him even more anxious as the final rope was cut. Just as he was about to cut the rope on the other side, he saw the orcs were just a few steps away, their savage eyes staring right at him. There was no time. The bridge suddenly collapsed, and the orcs fell into the dark, deep pit, their roars echoing until they vanished into the black void. Soda collapsed to his knees, sweat pouring down his face, realizing the man in glasses had used his own knife to cut the rope on the other side, despite being exhausted and severely injured. A little while later, the rescue team arrived to save the man and the remaining members of the group, but he still asked if Soda was there, as he wanted to thank him. However, Soda had already left quietly, avoiding the attention of the rescuers, who also wanted to hear his account. When he finally got home, Soda was still panting from the stressful escape. Later, he checked the news and confirmed that all 6 members of the expedition team were injured, and among them, 2 had died. Soda had witnessed that horrific scene, even though it wasn't his fault. The incident made him start to wonder what was going on, because he seemed to be the only one who was actually enjoying this world. As he sat thinking about everything that had happened that day, trying to figure out what he could have done better, Kano approached, asking worriedly if he was okay. Soda reassured her that he was fine. The 2 of them sat at the dinner table, but Soda's mind was still haunted by the images of the bodies he had seen. Finally, He hesitantly asked his sister if she would go into a dungeon with him, even if it was against the law. Kano looked at him, puzzled by the unexpected question in the quiet kitchen. The fact that Soda wanted her opinion on sneaking into a dungeon through a secret entrance surprised her, especially since it was illegal. She knew she had always wanted to fight alongside her brother, but she also understood that if they were caught, Soda would be in trouble, especially since she was underage. Just then, Soda explained that they would only get in trouble if they were caught. Since Kano was also aiming to get into his school, he figured it would be good for her to get stronger before enrolling. He began to talk about a skill called fabrication, a skill that could provide false information to an opponent, and if Kano really wanted to explore dungeons at her current age, she absolutely had to learn the skill. Kano wondered why Soda was willing to go to such lengths for her, especially when he had been against the idea before. But she understood her brother's concern. Soda asked if she remembered what happened at the library last week, when she stood up for him against a bully. Soda explained that every year students from outside were treated the same way, and some even had to endure violence. In a situation like that, he wanted Kano to be able to defend herself, clenching his fist to emphasize his point. Seeing his sister nod in agreement, Soda felt a sense of relief as she smiled, despite her worries, and agreed to go with him. He could see the excitement sparkling in her eyes, and he sighed in relief seeing his sister happy, even though half of what he said was a lie. According to the story's progression in this world, there was a path that would lead to the deaths of many characters, including the Narumi family, who were merely minor characters in the game. This was why getting stronger was necessary, and the people in this world needed to be strong as well. Soda knew exactly what would happen in the story, a significant advantage, but revealing the truth was risky. Remembering the horrific scene of 2 expedition members being beaten and eaten alive, Soda knew he couldn't hesitate to take his sister into the dungeon because he wanted to protect his loved ones, even if this was another person's family whose body he was just temporarily occupying. A week later, they were walking through the forest together, and Soda looked back at his sister as she asked if they were there yet. Soda teased her, asking if he had said they were going to walk through a mountain, to which Kano shook her head no. The only reason they had to take this roundabout way was because a few students might recognize Kano, and Soda wanted to make sure she wouldn't get into trouble. The two went down to the basement and entered an abandoned classroom. Soda raised his hand to the blackboard, activating a symbol to transport them into the dungeon, where they would fight a few orcs on their way to the bridge. He explained the plan, telling her not to be afraid, and Kano replied confidently that she had only one job, and she could do it. Soda walked across the bridge, thinking about what they had practiced. Over the past 2 weeks, to ensure everything went smoothly, Kano was equipped with a machete while he used scissors to cut the rope. Kano sat waiting comfortably, but when she saw the orcs approaching, the girl started screaming, tears welling up in her eyes. Soda yelled for her to cut the rope, and she quickly got to her feet. She raised her knife, while Soda had already finished cutting his side, but when Kano tried to cut the rope on the other side, the blade wouldn't catch. She froze as she saw the orcs getting closer and closer. Kano's brother rushed forward and cut the remaining rope just in time, getting a light scratch on his arm as the orcs plummeted into the abyss. Kano apologized for his wound, but Soda reassured her that he was fine because he was wearing a jacket made from direwolf hide. He also apologized, knowing this was the first time she had experienced such a terrifying situation. Kano felt a strange sensation spreading through her body, and Soda explained it was a symptom of leveling up. She was surprised to realize she had gone up 5 levels, which caught Soda off guard. When the girl mentioned changing her class, Soda immediately stopped her, explaining that the starting class, Novice, was actually more than people thought. If a player trained hard, they could level up 3 times. Before seeing a clear difference, the 2 siblings sat together after Soda went on and on about the system. Realizing he had said a bit too much, Kano listened intently, occasionally asking questions since she didn't know much about these things. Meanwhile, Yuma and his group had finally reached level 5 and could change to their desired classes, Kaoru became a warrior, and Yuma became a thief. The joy on their faces was obvious, but it didn't last long, as there was only 1 week left before the match against Korea. As the day of the duel drew closer, Korea spent more of his days off inspecting and studying the arena's location. While resting with his sister in the dungeon, Sota heard Kano warn him not to tell anyone about the bridge trap, because it would be a shame if other people started exploiting this hunting spot, or if scary people came asking around or even threatening them for the information. Hearing this, Sota forced a smile and nodded in agreement, clenching his fist for a moment. Looking at the ground, Sota wondered if his knowledge of this place made his sister suspicious. But after thinking about it, Kano said it didn't. Though her tone was a bit uncertain, Sota lied, saying he had just stumbled upon the area, though in reality, he had come here intentionally to level up. Still, he was surprised by the faith Kano had in Butao, which felt a little strange to him. Looking back on everything that had happened, Sota remembered the joy of getting into the adventurer's school, but also the sheer terror he'd felt in the library. Kano seemed to have a certain set of priorities for everything, but then she would change them, making Sota feel that something was off, as if it was all too natural to be an act. He wondered if he could really trust his own sister. In another part of the dungeon, Kaoru and her group were training, and Yuma was overwhelming her with his attacks. The red-haired boy charged forward, swinging his sword powerfully, knocking Kaoru to the ground. They both panted for breath after the bout, before Yuma spoke. He offered a hand to help Kaoru up, saying that thanks to her, he was starting to get a feel for the rhythm of a sword fight. Kaoru gently placed her hand in his, letting him pull her up, but then turned away bashfully, trying to downplay Yuma's praise by saying she was just trying to imitate Korea's fighting style. Yuma smiled gratefully, but Kaoru still couldn't shake the anxiety welling up inside her. She tightened her grip on the hilt of her sword, placing a hand on her chest, and looked up to ask Yuma if he thought he could actually win against Korea. Yuma's expression grew troubled and tense, a hint of doubt on his face, and he answered bluntly that he really didn't know. Kaoru stood in silence, and the other members of the group chime in, suggesting that if Yuma feels his chances of winning are low, then backing out is also an option. But Yuma immediately cuts them off, insisting that he can't back down. From the very beginning, Class E has been looked down on by everyone, inferior in both level and experience compared to Class D, and this is his chance to prove himself. He explains that if he backs out, nothing will change, and it will just give the upperclassmen another reason to call them cowards. This is also why Yuma can't afford to lose, as it's the only chance he has to win respect for Class E, especially since Korea, his opponent, is still training relentlessly, endlessly punching sandbags and tearing them to shreds, with barely a drop of sweat on his brow. Meanwhile, Sota and Kano, having earned a decent amount of money from their dungeon expeditions, head to the shop. Sota uses most of his money to buy his sister a better pair of shoes, ensuring her safety in future dungeon runs. As the days pass, everyone trains in their own way. The long-haired bully from Class D is also entering dungeons with his teammates, trying to level up as much as he can, while Yuma and his group each find their own ways to get stronger. Kaoru chooses to soak in the bathtub, her mind so lost in complex thoughts that she almost doesn't hear Sota calling her name. He manages to pull her back just in time, stopping her from stepping into the street while the light was still red. Kaoru awkwardly apologizes to Sota, and he asks how Yuma is doing. She explains that they reached level 6 in a month, and Yuma is still incredibly determined. Even so, this match is still going to be tough, because this is the infamous Korea event in the game where most first-time players fail. Although Yuma has leveled up well, just relying on his level isn't enough. He needs a special weapon to get an edge, though even that might not be enough to guarantee a win. Everyone gathers at the arena, and Kaoru silently prays as she's been stressed about the match for the past month. But Sota has a certain faith in Yuma's ability to win, watching as the red-haired boy draws his sword in preparation for the fight. Yuma is drenched in sweat, trying not to let the anxiety show in his eyes as he looks ahead, where Korea calls his name and asks if he's ready. Yuma tosses his scabbard aside, declaring that he's always ready. All the students in the school are in the stands, watching the match from every angle in the arena. Kaoru keeps her hands clasped tightly, her worry about the outcome obvious, when she overhears whispers from the upperclassmen. They're snickering, muttering to each other that the underclassmen don't know their place, and that they don't believe Yuma has a chance against Korea. Some students look confused as to why Class E would even dare to challenge their authority. Kaoru glances over at those students, just as her group hears the voice of that bully from before. They all turn their heads, staring at the large guy approaching with a smug look on his face. He walks straight up to Sakuranko, making the pink-haired girl nervous and confused as he places a hand on her, greeting her in a sickeningly sweet voice. But just then, Naoto grabs his hand, asking if he's sure he can afford to be so relaxed. The bully just shoots him a sharp glare and mutters in annoyance, before Naoto turns his gaze to the arena. As the match is about to begin, Korea declares he's ready, and the referee confirms the start of the match. Immediately, Korea lunges forward with his blade, making Yuma's eyes go wide in shock. And Kaoru is stunned as well. Yuma barely manages to jump back to dodge, while Korea flashes a satisfied smirk at the fear now plain on Yuma's face. But Yuma was just getting started. Korea's great sword attack is so fast that Soda's naked eye can't keep up. But he knows Yuma has come a long way, now having reached level 8. Thinking about facing Korea himself, Soda wonders if he'd have a better chance of winning, but immediately answers his own question with a no because the gap in experience and level between Class D and Class E is still just too big. Kaoru and the other students watched the match closely. She thought to herself that even though the group had reached level 6, everyone's endurance and combat skills were different. There might even be someone at level 7 who was still weaker than her. This meant that even though level wasn't the deciding factor, Korea, at level 11 with his superior physique, made it impossible for either of them to let their guard down. But this was the moment for Yuma's secret weapon to come into play. As Korea swung his sword to attack, Yuma stepped back to dodge, looked up, and asked Korea, in a challenging tone, prompting Korea to reply with confidence. Yuma smiled, gripping his blade tightly. It was a special sword with the ability to reduce an opponent's speed and a moderate chance to inflict paralysis, a rare and difficult weapon to acquire. The two of them stood facing each other, ready to continue the fight. Yuma suddenly dropped to one knee and then lunged toward Korea. Catching him by surprise for a moment, as Yuma unleashed a slash, Korea managed to block the blow with his own blade, and the two of them locked eyes for a split second, before the impact rang out. From the stands, the students commented on the match, with some saying Yuma was getting impatient and calling him weak. Even so, Kaoru noticed that Karia was still maintaining a cautious stance, avoiding any risky moves. Meanwhile, Soda was observing and realized that Korea had a tendency to endure weaker attacks before unleashing a powerful slash. And at that very moment, Korea was preparing to use that move again. Yuma, having already anticipated it, realized it was a pattern in Korea's fighting style. He narrowed his eyes, waiting for the right moment and activating the special ability of his static sword. The blade began to glow, as Yuma declared he would strike back, then use the sword's twin venom skill, stabbing Korea straight in the chest, inflicting the speed reduction and paralysis effects. Meanwhile, another scene was unfolding at the school. The bully who had recently been harassing Sota's family and Class E was thrown hard against one of the school's pillars, groaning in pain. He looked up to see a woman sitting on a throne-like chair, surrounded by other students standing behind her. This was the well-known figure in the school, Suo Kuki. Kuki sat on her chair, legs crossed, questioning the bully about the trouble he had caused, which Class E had been forced to endure right after enrolling. She expressed her disappointment that he had used her students in his acts of harassment and had failed to keep them under control. Kuki stressed that the rankings from Class A to E were absolute, and that she had used her connections to arrange the arena for Korea's match against Class E. She hoped Korea would lose this fight. A black-haired female student sitting nearby was about to warn her about what would happen if Korea lost, but was interrupted when another female student grabbed Cookie's leg, insisting that Korea would never lose. She stressed that even a level 7 student like herself couldn't imagine facing Korea, who had ventured into dangerous places and worked incredibly hard. Cookie looked down at the girl with a cold gaze, then turned and kicked her in the side after hearing what she said. Cookie reiterated, asserting that the school's hierarchical system was the only reason no one could deny reality. She turned to Korea to hear his opinion, but the short-haired male student just stood there silently, without answering. When the girl called out Korea's name and asked if he thought he was going to lose. Finally, he opened his mouth, asking Cookie in return if she thought he could win, or if he was lacking in effort. The girl looked confused by Korea's question, surprised when he bowed his head and apologized for the trouble he'd caused. Cookie said there was no need to apologize, and that Korea wasn't aware of the incident in the library. Even if he lost, he had still worked hard and wouldn't make excuses, letting the results of his actions speak for themselves. After that, Korea excused himself to return to his training. As he was about to leave, Cookie asked if he was going to help the female student, who was still pinned under her foot. Korea explained that he only came to apologize on behalf of Class A and told Cookie she could do whatever she wanted with the other girl. Then he turned and walked away from the classroom, hearing the pained groans of the female student begging Cookie to stop. Back in the match, despite being stabbed by the electro sword, Korea had already known about the weapon's abilities. Yuma, panting and smirking, declared that thanks to the sword's skill, he could see Korea's every move. But immediately, Korea countered, kicking Yuma and sending him flying, smirking as he asked what he was talking about, a terrifying threat in his voice. In reality, Korea had taken precautions and changed his armor to be resistant to the stun effect. Even so, Korea remained cautious, believing that Yuma still had something up his sleeve. The red-haired boy slowly got up, his body trembling with exhaustion. While Korea looked down on Yuma, the match continuing to the horror of the students. All of Class E was stunned and shocked, while Kaoru fell to the ground, panicking as she saw Yuma losing. Korea held Yuma up with one hand, grabbing him by the face, asking if he had anything to say or if he wanted to surrender. Yuma, his face bruised and his nose bleeding, screamed that he wouldn't surrender, but that only made Korea kick him away again, causing Yuma to scream in pain. In that moment, Korea rushed forward and slashed at Yuma's stomach, looking down at the boy who still tried to insist he hadn't surrendered. At this point, Sakurenko couldn't take it anymore and rushed forward, shielding Yuma from any further attacks. The pink-haired girl begged Korea to stop and not to hurt Yuma anymore, which made Korea pause. Naoto stared, unable to believe his eyes, while the bully smirked and asked if he should have responded to his words. The teacher left the arena, and with Yuma unable to fight back, the victory went to Korea. Korea exhaled, looking down at Yuma with an icy gaze, while Yuma lay defeated on the arena floor. Kaoru and Soda stood watching, filled with horror and confusion, not believing what they had just witnessed. The upperclassmen cheered wildly at Korea's victory, while Sakuranko sat beside Yuma, trying to hold on to whatever consciousness he might have left. As all of Class E looked on in shock and disappointment, Kaoru and Naoto ran to the main area of the arena, calling out Yuma's name, but just then Korea shouted, capturing the attention of all of Class E. He asked if they now understood who was stronger, who stood above them, and who they were meant to obey. Korea continued, saying that although a few in their class might get promoted to Class D or even Class A by graduation, he had no faith in them, seeing them all as nothing but slaves. He declared that the upperclassmen wanted a group of students to run errands for them, then sneered that they had no choice but to obey. Kuki sat in his usual chair, watching the monitor with a triumphant smile, his chin resting on his hand. Korea issued a challenge. If anyone in Class E had a problem with his words, he was ready to duel any of them, just as he had with Yuma. Yuma groaned, half conscious, while students from the upper classes laughed and jeered, mocking that Class E was all talk. As the upperclassmen left the arena, they sneered that Class E's spirit was the only commendable thing about them, but they would all just end up as servants. Korea told Class E to brace themselves, because they'd be run ragged with errands. Yuma, supported by Kaoru and Naoto, bowed his head in regret, apologizing for showing his weakness. The other students looked at him with an indescribable expression, perhaps a hint of pity, as Yuma tried to act strong and stand on his own, apologizing once more and promising to win next time. Soda, after silently looking around at everyone, quietly left the arena. In his mind, though he wanted to hold on to his anger and resentment, Soda knew the gap between their class and the others was too wide for him to overcome alone. Entering the empty classroom, he grabbed his school bag to leave early, pondering the cruel reality that the disparity between classes was something he couldn't change on his own. Soda felt sorry for Yuma, but this defeat wasn't too far off from the original story's main plot. However, the real issue that bothered him wasn't the outcome of the match, but who had given Karya the countermeasure for the static sword. This left Soda deeply confused, because the static sword was a powerful weapon, difficult to obtain, and people in this world would rarely expect to see an item of such quality in the hands of someone with a low status. Korea's armor was also different from how it usually was in the game. At first, Soda had considered this possibility, but now he was completely convinced that there might be other players besides him in this world. After the match, everyone either returned to class, went to the nurse's office, or spent the rest of the day wandering around. While Soda kept thinking about which of the hundreds of students at school had guided Yuma to get the static sword, and who had tipped off Korea on how to counter the weapon, he realized he might be overthinking it. But from now on, Soda decided to act on the assumption that other players could exist in this world, especially after today's events. In the story, defeating Yuma only brought disadvantages, and Soda couldn't understand the motive of this mysterious player. He needed to find out why he was brought here. And the progression of Donex's story was a key factor in uncovering that truth. As Soda stepped out of the building, he saw a man with glasses waiting, his eyes holding a clear purpose. The man looked up as Soda passed by, causing him to stop in surprise. Meanwhile, Yuma and his group were in the nurse's office, almost fully recovered thanks to rest and care. The nurse explained that Yuma wasn't seriously injured, neither internally nor externally, and that he would soon be able to return to his normal activities. This was good, because continuing their adventure and leveling up was crucial, despite the recent defeat. Yuma looked down, a hint of sadness in his eyes, and thanked Kaoru, Sakuranko, and Naoto for everything they had done for him. Naoto, the boy with the glasses, called for Yuma's attention, and also thanked him for fighting for the group's sake, though he was still a bit disappointed that their plan with the static sword had been seen through by the upperclassmen. But Naoto stressed that the fight wasn't meaningless. Yuma quietly thanked Naoto for his encouraging words, and then asked everyone to head back to class, saying he would stay and rest in the nurse's office for a little while. As the three of them left the nurse's office, Kaoru remarked that Yuma seemed to be doing better than she thought. But after a few silent steps, Naoto spoke up, saying that in reality, Yuma wasn't as okay as he looked. Kaoru was surprised, not understanding what Naoto was implying. Naoto explained that Yuma didn't want anyone to worry about him and was just using the priest-teacher's words as an excuse. Yuma was hiding the real reason he wanted to stay and rest alone, causing Naoto to punch one of the nearby pillars, expressing his frustration. He understood that Yuma just wanted them to leave him alone. Meanwhile, as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow across the sky, Soda heard someone call out to him near the school gate and recognized the man with glasses waiting for him. The man introduced himself as Kikuchi and asked if Soda was the one who had saved him in the dungeon, explaining that he'd come to thank him even though he was still recovering with his arm in a cast. Kikuchi remarked that Soda seemed experienced with dungeons, given his calmness and quick thinking when he wiped out a whole horde of orcs in one go. Even so, Kikuchi could tell Sota was just a student from his youthful appearance and guessed he probably attended the school. He then began to explain that on his previous trip, a member of his party had been bothered and harassed by another group of adventurers. He had tried to intervene so that everyone could get along and continue their journey. However, the other group told Kikuchi and his team about a place with treasure as an apology. That place turned out to be a lie, a trap, as they had actually been led to an orc lord's nest. Kikuchi looked down at the ground sadly, while the memory of the orc horde flashed through Sota's mind, making him feel guilty for not arriving sooner to help them. The man with the glasses looked at Sota and confessed that he had also done some research beforehand and had received a warning from the guild about confronting the orc swarm, implying that it was partly his own fault. But Sota reassured him, saying that regardless, anyone would understand the danger of going into the deeper levels of a dungeon. Kikuchi thanked him again with a gentle smile, which left Sota flustered. However, at that moment, Kikuchi's eyes suddenly widened as he recognized the students who had just walked out of the school gate. His face flashing with horror and rage, he yelled out, accusing that group of tricking his party and causing the deaths of 2 of its members. The bully, the one who had harassed Sota and the others, along with his 2 cronies, turned back to look toward Sota and Kikuchi. The long-haired student raised an eyebrow, looked at Kikuchi, and sarcastically called him a small fry, smirking as he asked how the orcs tasted. Rage flared up in Kikuchi, causing him to push Sota aside, about to charge at his opponents. The bully laughed even harder, saying it was what Kikuchi's party deserved. Kikuchi tried to lunge forward, but Sota pulled him back forcefully before things could get any worse, forcing him to step back. Sota looked up at the group of students who were laughing at the situation, mocking both Kikuchi and Sota. Sota glared, feeling the oppression from them and realizing that the school even sided with the bullies, putting more pressure on Class E. Although there was so much he wanted to say, he wasn't the type to loudly fight back like that. Still, he couldn't help but turn to Kikuchi, call him back, and declare that, while he couldn't make any promises, he would one day stand up to those upperclassmen. Kikuchi was surprised by this, knowing it would put Sota in a dangerous position against powerful people. But Sota reassured him, insisting that he would train hard and that he was more than he appeared to be. Kikuchi paused for a moment, then stood up with Sota's help, apologizing for his actions and thanking him. As they talked, it seemed someone was quietly watching everything from a distance. Hayase Kaoru, the blue-haired girl, had been having a strange dream recently, where she was like a chrysalis with the chance to one day become a butterfly. She was filled with hope for this transformation. But when the change finally came, what awaited her was far different from what she had imagined. Her newfound hope had been crushed after Yuma's failure, after everything he had said since the first weeks of class. Meanwhile, the person she once looked down on was slowly making his way up. Kaoru woke up in her bed, slowly opening her eyes, thinking about her recent recurring dream and the feeling of emptiness that was slowly consuming her. A new day began as sunlight shone down on the town. Kaoru got dressed, preparing for a normal school day, and went to Sota's house in the morning as they had promised each other when they were kids. Even though they still kept this promise, the two usually walked together in silence, with Kaoru in front and Sota trailing behind, neither of them saying a word. As they got closer to the school, Kaoru's eyes widened in surprise when she saw Yuma up ahead, carrying several bags and backpacks in his hands. Naoto offered an encouraging smile as he helped with 2 of the bags in Yuma's right hand, gently telling him he was working hard to lift his spirits. A faint smile appeared on Yuma's lips as Naoto asked if he was taking all these bags to Class D. Yuma nodded, explaining that he'd brought them from the dorms after cleaning their rooms for them. Kaoru also took a few bags from Yuma's left hand and started walking, leaving Sota to quietly follow behind. On their way to class, they overheard the bully from before bragging to some girls that his older brother had just been invited to a party by a prestigious branch, which piqued the girls' interest and made them ask for more details about the event. Naoto glanced at the scene, feeling disappointed by the situation. When Yuma sat down, he called Kaoru over, telling her that the group was heading down to the 6th floor today and asked what she thought of the plan. Kaoru turned away, looking troubled, and said she wouldn't be joining this time, wanting to train a bit more on her own. Yuma and the others respected her decision. The blue-haired girl ran alone through the forest, confronting the reason why she had stopped exploring dungeons with Yuma and the others. Kaoru used to feel comfortable in that group, but now something about it felt forced. As she and Soda walked to school together again, she wondered what excuse she could make to get away from him. But then she suddenly realized something and muttered to herself. Soda stopped and asked if something had happened recently, causing Kaoru to look back at him. She realized that even though she'd been keeping her distance since starting school, Soda was still worried about her. She spoke up, mentioning how surprised she was to see Yuma lose the match. Soda asked if she was disappointed, and she became flustered. Looking down at the ground and admitting she hadn't wanted Yuma to lose, feeling like she'd lost the confidence to carry on at this adventurer school. Soda looked at her in surprise, then recalled the look on Yuma's face, and walked past Kaoru, saying that all she needed to do was what she felt was right. His words made Kaoru think back to the inspiring words of encouragement Yuma had once said. They continued on to school, and when Kaoru entered the classroom, Yuma tried to greet her as usual. Kaoru immediately got her group's attention and apologized for skipping the dungeon explorations. She said that she'd thought it over and would be rejoining the group starting today. They responded quite casually. Yuma said he didn't expect her spirit to be so strong, while Sakurako called Kaoru's determination cute. Naoto didn't comment, leaving Kaoru a bit confused by their nonchalant attitude, but they treated her as friendly as ever. As Soda watched from a distance, the group resumed their adventure. In the dungeon, Kaoru struggled against a monster, but Yuma quickly jumped in, creating an opening for her to attack. Even though Yuma could have finished the monster off himself, he seemed to want her to be the one to claim victory, letting her take all the credit. In that moment, Kaoru thought about the things she hadn't realized before and silently thanked Soda for encouraging her. After that battle, she reached level 7. But the next day, Soda didn't come to school. The day before, Soda and his younger sister, Kano, had been steadily grinding levels together. And now Kano had also reached level 7. Kano jumped for joy with a radiant smile, while Soda contemplated what he had learned after over a month of exploring the dungeon. Good hunting grounds, bridge traps, and hunting spots found by players were all rare knowledge in this world, compared to the one he came from. Soda had asked Kikuchi about this, and there was no mistake about the general lack of knowledge regarding these effective hunting spots. But there was one thing that still troubled him. The world's DLC content. DLC includes new scenarios and levels, usually added after a game's release. During a break, as Soda and Kano sat together, he explained to his little sister that leveling up would get harder, so they would explore the 7th floor of the dungeon. At their current level, he thought they'd be safe. Soda emphasized that if his knowledge was correct, they would have the chance to get a special job, Ironclad Knight, with the ability to create and control golems. This DLC quest was called Heart of the Golem, but this job wasn't very popular because the golems moved slowly, and the player was often weaker than the golem itself in a fight. However, for someone unable to log out of the game, this job was a convenient option. Hearing this, Kano shot to her feet and cheered excitedly about this new possibility, making Soda laugh. He reassured his little sister that they would go to that area to check it out and experience what she was so eagerly looking forward to as they made their way together to the 7th floor. Soda thought about how they could change some things about their job, since this floor also had a pretty good hunting area. On the way, Kano suddenly said that she had a dual-wielding skill from the very beginning and asked if Soda knew anything about it. He froze, remembering that having a starting skill was extremely rare. A bit bewildered, he asked why Kano hadn't told him sooner, and she explained that she didn't really understand it. Speaking of starting skills, Soda also possessed the gluttony skill, but he recognized the dual-wielding skill immediately. Soda recalled the long description of the skill in his mind. It was a special skill usually found only in high-level professions like samurai, allowing the user to equip weapons in both hands to increase their attack hit rate. Soda asked Kano to confirm that she had never fought a monster head-on, and she affirmed that she hadn't. Hearing that, Soda explained that on their way, they would encounter a demonic wolf monster called a warg, and he wanted to let her face it to gain experience. Kano seemed to accept the task without any hesitation. Soda walked through the forest, observing his surroundings, until he finally spotted the demonic wolf. He glanced at Kano, and the two stood side by side, ready to face the monster. The wolf took a defensive stance, bared its fangs, and lunged, but Kano charged forward to meet it. However, the sight of its sharp, gaping jaws made her flinch slightly. In a moment of anxiety, Kano slid toward the monster. The demonic wolf pounced as she landed, but it got its teeth stuck in an old tree in its path, biting it in half and causing the tree to collapse. Kano stood still, covered in a light sweat, while Soda watched from a distance, ready to protect his sister if needed. This time, the warg charged again, trying to bite Kano. She focused, using both blades in her hands, and delivered a powerful slash to the monster's body. The warg collapsed, blood pouring from the wound, and died instantly. Before the warg's body turned to dust, Soda watched from afar and realized the power this skill had given his little sister, making him glad that Kano was on his side. Soda wondered if anyone else in this world had such a special talent. Suddenly, a howl echoed from the distance, and Soda realized it was the sound of another warg. The path to this point had been without any trouble, thanks to Soda's knowledge, but he suddenly remembered that this world left no room for careful preparations, and that the worst was yet to come. After defeating the dire wolf and continuing through the forest, Soda and Kano found a hidden pit. They both fell in and discovered a labyrinth with walls of stone and human skulls. They moved through the maze and eventually stumbled upon a stone pillar in a room. Soda recognized it immediately thanks to his knowledge from the game, as he had seen these gates before. Soda was thrilled that the stone pillar had appeared here and told Kano they should try to have their magical powers identified here. Kano blushed with excitement as they approached the stone pillar. Soda's goal on this floor was the Armored Knight quest, but he also wanted to acquire the impersonation skill, a skill from the thief class. This skill helped the user level up quickly and gain 3 extra skill slots. The plan was to change to the thief class to get impersonation, then switch to Armored Knight and explore at a manageable pace. Kano asked if she was doing it right, and Soda assured her she was doing great. Observing his little sister as she placed her left hand on the stone pillar, he stepped up to encourage her, saying that their goal was just ahead and that they should rest a bit before continuing. Kano agreed, and they sat down to rest, before continuing on into an area filled with crumbling walls and a series of castle-like structures. Causing Kano's eyes to light up in amazement, Soda explained that this area was a golem stronghold. The two of them walked to the entrance, passed under the gate, and stopped before a giant golem, which left them both surprised and a little scared, until Kano realized it wasn't attacking or moving. Soda explained that the golem wouldn't attack unless someone got too close, and pointed to the crystal embedded in its back, saying it was one of the items needed for the Armored Knight quest, and also a highly valuable treasure. The person they would sell the crystal to was a woman in lavish attire, with demonic eyes, horns, and a sharp, cold gaze. This woman ran a shop on the 10th floor, but at their current level, they couldn't get there yet. Even so, they would have to visit if they wanted to sell the crystal. Soda was surprised to see Kano jumping up and down in front of him, excited to hear about the shop. He gently pushed his sister's face away and said they should look around the area for a bit before doing anything. Soda also reminded Kano that skeletons might appear, so they couldn't let their guard down. As they passed through a doorway, just as predicted, a few skeletons materialized out of thin air, but Soda quickly cut through them before they could fully form. He walked past the disintegrating remains with a calm expression, as if they didn't bother him at all. Suddenly, Soda heard a clicking sound in the distance, but he ignored it and explained to Kano that the castle's treasure room was just ahead, and that something might be waiting for them there, making her excited about the possibility of discovering treasure. They decided to check out what was happening, slowly approaching the door and cracking it open, leaving just a tiny gap. Inside the room, a lone creature sat on a throne, a giant skeleton with horns and high-grade armor, which immediately told Soda this was no ordinary skeleton. If it was a rare monster, he guessed its level had to be at least 8. However, Kano was drawn to something else. She pointed to the monster's feet, where a small box lay beneath the throne. She thought it might be treasure and asked her brother if he wanted to defeat the monster to get the box. Soda, a little tense, began to sweat and said they wouldn't try it right now, as that skeleton looked dangerous. He advised that they should try it after taking down a few golems first. Even so, Kano couldn't stop thinking about the box. They left the castle area and returned to the stone pillar to teleport home. The next day, without hesitation, they returned to that place. This time, Soda wondered if Kaoru was okay, since she looked so worried. Soda realized that in the original game, Kaoru had never worn an expression like that. So it was likely that his words had caused this change. He wanted to ask Kaoru about the static sword and if she knew anything about it, but he figured it was better to just observe for a while longer. Kano caught Soda's attention and pointed in a certain direction. When he turned to look, Soda's eyes widened. At the sight of a campfire, a sign that someone had been here since they had last left. Standing at the side of the fire, Soda was stunned and confused. A campfire on a lower floor in such a secret area meant his assumptions about the DLC area were completely wrong. He glanced over at the stone pillar where the teleportation gate was located and wondered if these people knew about the gate, or if they'd simply chosen not to use it. If they had stayed here all night, it was possible the group was still around somewhere. Perhaps because they didn't know how the gate worked or had simply decided to ignore it. Whatever the reason, the situation was probably going to get more dangerous from here. While he was lost in thought, Soda was startled by someone's voice calling his and Kano's names, causing them both to whip around toward the sound. A man with a desperate expression was approaching them, asking if they had any food because he and his teammates were exhausted from hunger. Soda raised his sword defensively, confused as to why this man was talking to him without any hesitation. The man seemed exhausted from running over, bending down with his hands on his knees, panting. Just then, 2 more people entered the area. However, Soda remained on guard and asked them why they were here. The man held up both hands trying to show he was peaceful and explained that they had cornered a demon wolf and one of their teammates had called out when they discovered a nearby hole, which led to a tunnel. After the whole group gathered together, they had accidentally ended up in this place. The way the man spoke made it sound like they were just people who had stumbled in here by accident. But that was still a huge problem, because Soda couldn't go back without losing them first. Once again, Soda's train of thought was cut short as the man continued to ask about food, desperately asking if Sota and Kano had any food at all, while the others also looked visibly exhausted, pleading that they were close to their limit. Kano, though reluctant, was kind enough to take out a ration and hand it to the group. The third member of their party immediately perked up at the sight of the food and even said offhandedly that they didn't need to be so stingy, even though Kano clearly had every right to keep the food for herself if she wanted. Soda sighed internally, just wanting to get away from these people quickly. However, once again, his thoughts were interrupted when he saw the group, now full of energy after eating, wanting to explore the fortress. He was surprised by this reaction and asked if they really wanted to enter the fortress, suggesting that it might be better for them to go home and rest since they were all tired. The man looked confused by Soda's question and went on to say that his group had found an unexplored map on the 7th floor, so he saw no reason not to explore this place. Soda knew this was going to be a pain, but the way the man phrased his sentence showed that this group truly knew nothing about the teleportation gate. It made sense. given that a person wouldn't know it existed. After they left, Sora told Kano that the group would probably head home on their own after running into a few golems. But they both grumbled about the ration that had been taken. Kano even grimaced, pinching her nose as she pointed out that the group didn't smell very pleasant at all. Soda explained that the group had probably been exploring the dungeon for days, but Kano believed that her brother was a higher level than them. However, Soda thought that might not be the case. Kano was about to use her simple appraisal skill to check the other group's stats, but Soda stopped her, because using the skill could alert the other party, increasing their hostility, or be considered a rude action. Soda moved closer and suggested they should ask the new group about their stats before using the skill, and once they got permission, they could use the appraisal skill. Thanks to that, Soda and Kano were able to see the names, jobs, levels, and skill counts of the three men. Kano was puzzled. Soda explained that after taking down a few golems, they would pull back and leave the hunting ground, as they shouldn't monopolize the area. One of the men overheard them and leaned in, curious about what they were whispering. Soda, flustered, suggested they split into two groups to explore more efficiently. The two groups split up to scout the area, and Soda handled taking down the golems, while Kano was in charge of destroying their cores. Once they reached a higher level, they would start selling the precious gems. She thought for a moment before agreeing, and Soda smiled, satisfied. Just as the other group found Soda and Kano, they said they had discovered a strange skeleton in the castle, explaining that it looked very strong and they should team up to defeat it. Soda glanced at Kano before trying to refuse the offer. However, Masaru, the other group's leader, became aggressive, mentioning that his group was a branch of the Colors organization. This reminded Soda of the bully from before, meaning Masaru might be that bully's older brother. Although Soda tried to refuse with the excuse that he and his sister might slow the group down, inwardly, he didn't want to get involved and make enemies of them. Still, he knew he had no other choice and reluctantly agreed, realizing that arguing was pointless. Everyone headed towards the door, and Kazuya said they should use the appraisal skill to check the skeleton before preparing to open it. Soda figured they could probably defeat the skeleton if it was around level 9 or 10, because if it was level 11 or higher, it would be extremely difficult. But when Kazuya looked in and used his appraisal skill, he immediately ran away in terror, screaming that there was no way they could beat it, because the skeleton was level 25. Just then, a powerful attack from the skeleton tore Kazuya to pieces, blasting a huge hole in the door, through which the skeleton could be seen standing with its arm extended after the powerful strike.